Hello, I'm Emma, and welcome to MindMap HQ. Today, we're tackling a really difficult, but I think essential task. We're doing a critical examination of one of history's most infamous and destructive books, Kampf. Now, our goal here is not to give a platform to its ideas, but to actually deconstruct them, to understand how they were built and why they proved so tragically effective. So let's get one thing straight right from the get-go. Engaging with this text is a difficult necessity. To really comprehend the catastrophes of the 20th century, we kind of have to understand the ideological blueprint that fueled them. This explainer is going to treat the book purely as a historical document, mapping out its arguments to understand their mechanics. So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the book's structure and its purpose. From there, we'll dive into the author's self-described formative years. Then, we're going to dissect the core racial ideology that is literally the foundation of the whole thing, before analyzing its cold, calculated method for propaganda. And finally, we'll get to a verdict on what this all means for us today. So, what is this book, really? Well, it's not just one thing, and that's part of its design. According to its translator's introduction, it was written to serve 4 distinct functions all at the same time, which makes it this complex, multi-layered piece of political machinery. What's so effective and so insidious is how these 4 functions all work together. First, you've got the autobiography, which crafts a very specific, very curated personal story. Second, it presents itself as a history lesson, offering this totally skewed interpretation of World War I and what came after. Third, it lays out a complete worldview, an ideology that's supposed to explain, well, everything. And finally, it's a blueprint for action, a very practical guide for how to get political power. Each part is designed to prop up the others. All right, let's dig into that first piece of the puzzle, the autobiography. The author places this enormous emphasis on his early years in Vienna. He frames it as this crucible, the period where his entire worldview was forged out of personal hardship and supposedly intellectual discovery. Here's a quick look at the timeline from the text. He was born in Austria in 1889, and he lost both of his parents by the time he was 18. The big one, the one he frames as the absolute turning point in his life, is that move to Vienna in 1907 as a young, struggling artist. That's the genesis of the whole story he tells. This quote from the book, it's just incredibly revealing. The author explicitly connects his personal suffering, his poverty, his hunger, his failure, to a political awakening. He paints Vienna not just as a city, but as a classroom for his later hatreds, identifying what he calls the 2 dangers that would become the absolute obsession of his political life. And this is the key, right? He's building a story, a narrative of transformation. He claims he arrived in Vienna as this soft-hearted cosmopolitan, and that through his observations and studies there, he emerged a hardened, outright anti-Semite. This carefully crafted story is all about legitimizing his ideology, making it seem like a product of harsh reality rather than just baseless prejudice. Okay, so that personal story, it's not just a story. It's the launch pad for the book's ideological core. Everything builds towards the ideas in Chapter 11, nation and race. This is the intellectual engine of the entire project, and it's based on a single, powerful, and utterly false dichotomy. First, on one side of this equation, he establishes a hero figure, the Aryan. The author defines this group not just as a race, but as the one and only founder of culture. And the key characteristic of this Aryan, according to the book, isn't intelligence. It's a willingness to sacrifice oneself for the good of the community. This idealism is what supposedly allows them to build entire civilizations. And then, of course, every hero needs a villain. So the author creates one. The Jew is defined in direct, total opposition to the Aryan. If the Aryan is a self-sacrificing creator, the Jew is portrayed as a purely egoistic parasite, driven only by an instinct for self-preservation. This creates this irreconcilable conflict right at the heart of his worldview. And when you put it side by side like this, you can see just how brutally simple this ideology is. It's a binary worldview, creator versus destroyer, idealism versus egoism, civilization versus parasite. According to the text, all of history is just the struggle between these 2 forces. There's no middle ground, no complexity, nothing. And this is where all that twisted logic was heading. This leads to the book's central and catastrophic conclusion. The author argues that the downfall of cultured people is caused by just one thing, racial mixing. So the preservation of pure blood is then presented as the highest purpose of the state and the key to national salvation. This is the ideological justification for everything that followed. So, how does this hateful ideology actually get turned into a practical plan? The book is chillingly honest about its methods. This isn't just a collection of horrible ideas. It's a manual, a playbook on how to seize power by manipulating human psychology. Chapter 6 just lays out the rules of propaganda with this cynical clarity. First up, forget the intellectuals. You only aim for the masses. Second, logic is completely irrelevant. Propaganda must be purely emotional. Third, keep it simple. Boil every complex issue down to a good versus evil slogan. And fourth, repeat those simple emotional slogans over and over and over until they're just accepted as truth. And what's the end game for all this? A single goal, what he calls the nationalization of the masses. The book argues that any political movement that relies on intellectual debate is just doomed to fail. Power, it claims, comes from winning the unconditional emotional loyalty of the people through a mix of relentless propaganda and the ever-present threat of brute force. All right, so we've pulled apart the story, the ideology, and the playbook. Where does that leave us? What does it all add up to? What is the final verdict on this text? This brings us to the central, terrifying question that this book raises. I mean, its racial theories are scientifically baseless, its history is a complete distortion, its logic is full of contradictions, and yet it became the foundation for a movement that captivated an entire nation and led to unimaginable destruction. How is that even possible? Well, the answer is right here, in how all those pieces fit together. The book shows how a compelling personal story can be weaponized. It demonstrates the power of a simple black and white worldview that offers easy answers to really complex problems. It openly rejects any kind of intellectual argument in favor of pure emotional manipulation and repetition. And it combines all of this hateful ideology with a ruthlessly practical plan for gaining power. This final quote, I think, just perfectly captures the book's ultimate argument. He's basically saying that brute force alone isn't enough. To be truly effective, force has to be justified by a powerful, all-encompassing idea, a worldview. The whole purpose of the book was to provide that very idea, creating a kind of moral permission for the ruthless application of power. And that brings us to the final question. After all of this, should you actually read this book today? Here's the verdict. If you are looking for truth, for wisdom, or for historical accuracy, the answer is an emphatic no. The book is a monument of lies and hatred. But as a case study, as a primary source for understanding how a toxic ideology is built, packaged, and sold to the masses, it remains a chilling and, I think, a vital warning from history. Understanding these mechanisms is probably our best defense against them. If you found this critical breakdown valuable, please consider liking this explainer and subscribing to MindMap HQ for more analyses of foundational texts and ideas. Thanks for mapping this out with me here at MindMap HQ. See you in the next chapter.